Good evening, dear viewers, and welcome to All 24 Nightly News, broadcasting live from Algiers. I'm your host, Karim Zachary, and up next are the top stories. Dbeiba fires Al-Mangoush as Libya sees outcry against normalization. Also coming up, African NGOs caution ECOWAS on Niger, while France's Macron pushes for swift military intervention. Also ahead, Sudan sees new peace initiative amidst leadership disagreement and ongoing clashes continue. And shifts in Ukraine's strategy follow secret NATO meeting, while Moscow thwarts attacks on Western Russia. Hello again, and thank you for joining us. Let's get started with our topical news. Libya's Prime Minister Dbeiba dismissed Foreign Minister Al-Mangoush after she met with Zionist Foreign Minister Ali Cohen. Dbeiba rejected normalization with the entity and refused to meet with Cohen. The move follows Al-Mangoush's suspension and investigation. She's now banned from traveling, and the Libyan Internal Security Agency denied rumors of her travel approval. Still in the same context, the Libyan Foreign Ministry reiterated its unwavering support for Arab and Islamic causes, particularly and notably the Palestinian one. It affirmed Al-Quds as Palestine's eternal capital and asserted its resolute stance. The ministry regards the Rome meeting as spontaneous and instructed, clarifying that no discussion nor agreement took place, aligning with its official statement. The revelation of Al-Mangoush's meeting with Cohen ignited strong local backlash and condemnation, uniting Libyans against normalization. Protests erupted across Libya, including demonstrators setting fire outside the National Unity Government's headquarters in Tripoli and storming the Foreign Ministry. Protesters voiced support for the Palestinian cause and rejection of ties with the Zionist entity. Similar protests occurred in Zawiya, Tajura, Zliten, and Misrata, reflecting widespread opposition to the disclosed meeting and any normalization efforts.
We condemn this meeting with the Zionist minister, and we refuse any normalization. If the news about this meeting is true, we really condemn it.
We strongly support the Palestinian people. We don't accept any occupation against them by Israel or others. We as Libyans are free, and we don't accept this kind of acts no matter what. We always support the Palestinian people.
The Presidential Council urged clarity on Al-Mangoush's meeting with the Zionist Foreign Minister, stating that it contradicts foreign policy, departs from national principles, and violates laws criminalizing engagement with the Zionist government. The government seeks severe penalties if confirmed. For its part, the Supreme Council of State also expressed surprise at Al-Mangoush's meeting and called for accountability of those involved. The Justice and Construction Party denounced the meeting, while Dar al-Iftah called it a direct affront to national and religious values, urging public condemnation. Moving on to neighboring Morocco now, Moroccan security forces breached the Gabonese embassy in Rabat last Saturday in a clear violation of international diplomatic norms. Gabonese community groups with around 5,000 signatures accused Moroccan security of using violence against Gabonese citizens attempting to access the embassy for vote counting in the presidential elections. West African civil society groups are urging ECOWAS to avoid a military intervention in Niger, fearing increased suffering and violence. Despite a military council deadline, French President Emmanuel Macron keeps his ambassador in Niger and calls on ECOWAS leaders to intervene militarily to prevent a similar coup threats in the region as in Niamey. Here's Osama Ayadi with more.
Tensions are still on the rise in West Africa as civil society groups issue a strong warning to the ECOWAS bloc against pursuing military intervention in Niger. These organizations representing the economic community of West African states have vehemently rejected ECOWAS leaders' push for military action. They stress the potential dire consequences for the already suffering population, urging leaders to prioritize restoring peace democratically.
It is not in anybody's interest. Certainly not in the interest of any African country in this bloc. So they don't have a choice. Now, the junta have said they're giving it 3 years. All ECOWAS can now do is to negotiate a shorter timeline.
In the midst of this, French President Emmanuel Macron has maintained his stance despite the Military Council's deadline in Niamey passing. Macron remains resolute in not recalling his nation's ambassador from Niger. He has also called on ECOWAS leaders to consider military intervention due to the concerns over the recent coup and similar threats.
I think that our policy is correct. It is based on the courage of President Bazoum, on the commitment of our diplomats, and our ambassador, who will stay despite pressure and despite illegal claims of authority.
Nigeria's presidency has also weighed in. Ajurin Geladi, spokesperson for President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, clarified their stance. While they closely monitor the Niger crisis, military intervention is seen as a last resort within the ECOWAS strategy.
Sanctions against the military leaders in Niger have made breakthroughs at the negotiating table. The ECOWAS president believes that the military intervention in Niger is the last option, not the next step.
As West African nations grapple with these pivotal choices, the entire region could be impacted by the action it would eventually take.
And in related matter, UN envoy Al-Gassim Wayne stated that the Niger crisis has hindered the withdrawal of MINUSMA forces from Mali, but affirmed UN's dedication to getting the withdrawal over with by December 31st.
Closing a mission built over a decade within a period of 6 months is a very complex and ambitious endeavor. In concrete terms, it entails the repatriation of 12,947 uniformed personnel, the separation of 1,786 civilian staff, the repatriation or relocation of a load of approximately 5,500 sea containers of contention and United Nations-owned equipment and almost 4,000 vehicles, as well as the closure and handover of 12 camps and 1 temporary operating base to Malian civilian authorities.
UN's Mali envoy Al-Gassim Wayne cautioned against disregarding the Algiers negotiated peace agreement. In a briefing to the UN Security Council, he highlighted its role in long-term stability and urged signatories to advance peace and reconciliation efforts. Al-Gassim Wayne also affirmed UN support for Bamako's authority in sustainable development and announced talks to bolster UN backing for Mali's government.
Between the 2nd and the 4th of August, the MINUSMA mission and the Malian government discussed the possibility of supporting the transitional period, the peace process, the restoration of state authority throughout the country, and other important issues, including human rights. A team composed of representatives of the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, as well as the African Union, participated in the discussion. The team has affirmed its support for the authorities on the basis of working to achieve sustainable development, and the discussion is still ongoing in order to consolidate support between us and the government. MINUSMA will leave Mali, but the United Nations will remain.
In Africa still, renewed fighting occurred between the Sudanese army and rapid support forces near Khartoum's Armored Corps camp. The rapid support forces sought to retake their base, attacking from multiple directions over 9 days. The Sudanese army responded with artillery shelling from Karari military area. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Sudan's Sovereignty Council head, rejected negotiations with traitors and rebels, as he put it, responding to a peace initiative from Rapid Support Forces Commander Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. Al-Burhan's statement was captured in a video during his rare visit to Port Sudan's Flamingo Naval Base, a departure from the capital after over 4 months of conflict.
I confirmed that my exit from the General Command took place without any help, and I did not leave with a deal or by arranging any agreement. This was a military action carried out by the armed forces. And anyone who says that there is an agreement, or that there is a party that helped, or that there is a deal, is delusional. We do not agree with the traitors or those outside the Sudanese people.
To the Middle East now, Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh called on countries worldwide to intervene and halt the Zionist apartheid actions against Palestinians. Addressing a government session in Ramallah, he emphasized that Israel's discriminatory system is not just a practice but reinforced by various laws enacted by the occupying authorities.
لم يكن العالم بحاجة لسماع تصريح.
The world did not need to hear the statement of the Zionist minister Ben-Gvir in order to be convinced and ascertain the racist ideas that shape the thought and behavior of those who today rule the occupying state. The racist practices of Ben-Gvir and all members of the Zionist government and its affiliated militias that espouse the doctrine of killing, burning, erasure, and genocide are enough to the world to stop dealing with this government, condemn its practices, enforce international laws, calling for sanctions, and protect the Palestinian people. The world must take all necessary measures to stop Zionist apartheid crimes against Palestinians. For our part, we put this in front of the international platforms and institutions and confront it on the ground. The world must prevent its companies from participating in any colonial practice on our land.
In Palestine, still, a shortage of international financial aid jeopardizes the continuity of United Nations Relief and Works Agency UNRWA schools in Gaza. Without sufficient funding, these schools may be forced to close by year-end, impacting the future of numerous educators and pupils alike in the region. Here's this from Sid.
Students in the Gaza Strip kick off their new school term. However, the funding crisis at the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency may interrupt their education year. United Nations Relief and Works Agency operates 288 schools in the Palestinian territory and funds 700 schools in the Middle East region, along with 140 medical clinics. A shortfall of nearly $200 million threatens staff salaries and services until the end of 2023.
Right now, we are short of funds for the final quarter of this year. And what's at risk is children being able to go to school, mothers being able to take a baby to a health clinic, or a family being able to put food on the table at the end of the day.
In a region where 2/3 of Gaza's 2.3 million population are refugees, UNRWA schools play a vital role. These schools even provide support beyond education. It is considered as a space where pupils find an escape from the Zionist wage war against Gazans. However, the psychological impact of the ever-present threat of the conflict remains.
Effectively, children in Gaza are going to school traumatized by war. Our last 2 school years have been interrupted by war. We now have 38% of children in our schools who are experiencing traumatic stress.
Amid all these hardships, UNRWA services provide aid for Palestinian refugees beyond schools funding.
Now, because of the economic situation, 1.2 million refugees rely upon UNRWA so that they've got enough food to put a meal on the table at the end of the day. So, we are working very hard with the international community to find the resources needed to maintain these essential services in Gaza.
Where am I supposed to get my daughter's school bags? This one's not last year's, but the year before, and I tell my sons that they should endure the burden. But for how long can I do this? Without the UNRWA, we're nothing. If there are cutbacks at the agency, we're the ones affected. We will be in the streets now, and these kids will end up in the streets.
Despite the UN support, economic challenges persist and have deepened in the last year. A 17-year blockade has significantly impacted Gaza's economy, leading to heightened reliance on international aid. The situation is particularly dire, with 3 out of 4 Gazans now dependent on aid for half their food.
To the latest development in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, that is, Russia destroyed Kiev military airport and downed a Ukrainian fighter jet, while Ukraine responded with a drone strike on a Russian airfield in Kursk. Meanwhile, a meeting of NATO military chiefs and Ukraine's top generals suggested a change in Ukraine's military strategy. The story with Sofian Katuri.
A recent development of the ongoing Ukraine war. Russia said it destroyed a military airport in the Ukrainian capital Kiev and shot down at least one fighter jet of the Ukrainian Air Force. In response, Ukraine confirmed a drone attack against a Russian military airfield in Kursk.
We launched a strike with long-range airborne precision weapons against an airfield in Kyiv region, hitting all designated targets. Our forces shot down 2 Su-25 fighter jets of the Ukrainian Air Force, intercepted 9 HIMARS rockets and 30 unnamed aerial vehicles.
During its 2-month-old counteroffensive, Kyiv said its troops had liberated the southeastern settlement of Robotyne and were trying to push further for the south.
Mr. President, Mr. Commander-in-Chief, the village of Robotyne in the Zaporizhia region has been liberated by the 47th Mechanized Brigade and adjacent units. The blue and yellow flag would be raised in every Ukrainian village. Glory to Ukraine.
Ukraine's success of retaking Robotyne, which Russia has not confirmed, follows media reports of a meeting this month of senior NATO military chiefs and Ukraine's top general, already set in Ukraine's military strategy. Ukrainian drone attacks have become a frequent occurrence in the conflict between the two neighboring countries due to its counteroffensive and West military supply.
Still with Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky raised the prospect of conducting democratic elections during wartime contingent on specific conditions being met. Zelensky mentioned discussing this with American Republican Senator Lindsey Graham during his recent visit to Kiev. The elections could be considered if there's consensus among parties and divisions are managed, as noted by Zelensky in a local television program.
I gave Lindsey Graham a very simple answer very quickly. He was very pleased with it, as long as our legislators are willing to do it. Why? This was because the electoral code would need to be amended for elections to happen during material law.
The Russian presidency dismissed any connection between a second Ukrainian ship passing through the Black Sea and reviving the grain deal. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov emphasized that Russia's stance on the agreement's revival hinges on the West upholding promises regarding grain and fertilizer exports. A second cargo ship from Odessa reached safe waters, Ukraine stated, despite Russian warnings against them as potential military targets.
This has nothing to do with the prospects of resuming the grain deal. The prospects of renewing the grain deal depend on actual implementation, not just words, promises, and undertakings made to the Russian side, which means the implementation of the Russia-related part of the deal. This is a completely different matter. Our Ministry of Defense is doing the necessary monitoring.
And in other news, European Council President Charles Michel stated that the EU's enlargement to include new members will not occur before 2030. Speaking at the Bled Strategy Forum in Slovenia, Michel emphasized that expansion will continue to be based on merit, requiring adherence to the rule of law, European economic standards, and alignment with Brussels' foreign policy.
It will be difficult, it will be complex, sometimes painful for the future member states and for the EU, but let's be clear. If we want to be credible, I believe we must talk about timing. We must talk about our homework and have a suggestion. As we prepare the EU's next strategic agenda, we must set ourselves a clear goal. I believe we must be ready on both sides by 2030 to enlarge.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo aimed to stabilize economic ties between the top economies during her China visit. She stressed healthy competition in her speech to Chinese Commerce Minister and confirmed no intent to hinder China's economic progress. For his part, Wang Wentao expressed China's willingness to cooperate for a favorable political environment, boosting deeper collaboration among companies.
to establish a new commercial issues working group, a formal working group, which will involve U.S. and Chinese government officials, and very importantly, U.S. and Chinese commercial private sector representatives, as we seek solutions on trade and investment issues and to advance U.S. commercial interests in China. Second, we agreed to launch an export control enforcement information exchange that will serve as a platform, we hope, to reduce misunderstandings of U.S. national security policies. The United States is committed to being transparent about our export control enforcement strategy. I want to be clear, we are not compromising or negotiating in matters of national security, period. But this is meant to be a dialogue where we increase transparency and where we are clear about what we are doing as it relates to export control enforcement.
Japan's chief cabinet secretary expressed regret on Monday for China's harassing phone calls linked to Fukushima's radioactive water discharge. Japan initiated this process last Thursday to close the plant after its 2011 reactor collapsed due to an earthquake. In response, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said Beijing has always safeguarded and legitimate rights and interests of foreigners in China in accordance with the law. A Pakistani court on Monday rejected sedition charges against ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan. The Balochistan High Court ruled the case was cancelled as plaintiffs lacked required government approval for incitement charges. Khan faced accusations in March over a sermon seen as sedition based on a complaint filed in Quetta, Balochistan province. And in other news, Russian President Vladimir Putin informed Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi of his non-attendance at the upcoming G20 summit in New Delhi. The Indian government stated on Monday that Putin conveyed this during a phone call, mentioning that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov would represent Moscow at the summit. The Italian Lampedusa is witnessing a record influx of irregular migrants, with the arrival of about 90,000 migrants to the island during the first 7 months of this year. Tunisia and Libya took the lead in the number of clandestine migrants to reach Italy, with more than 60% of the total arrivals to the island. Georgia's court scheduled a trial session for September 6th to address the election fraud case against former U.S. President Donald Trump. This courtroom appearance marks the post-indictment debut of the prosecution team led by Willis. Both sides will present their initial arguments about the recently unveiled case, which accuses a broad conspiracy to undermine the 2020 presidential election in Georgia and other states. For more news making headlines around the globe, here's the news in brief compiled for us by Salman Asif this time.
Aleppo International Airport in northern Syria went out of service as a result of a new Zionist air aggression from the direction of the Mediterranean, west of Latakia, causing material damage. Poland and the Baltic states demanded that the Belarus expel the Russian Wagner military group. The Polish Minister of the Interior stressed that his country and the Baltic countries will completely close their borders with Belarus in the event of recording critical incidents in the areas bordering neighboring countries. A spokesman for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in a regular press interview, said that travelers coming to his country no longer need to detect infection with COVID-19 before leaving for China, starting from the 30th of August. 4 children drowned off the Greek island of Lesbos, and 1 woman drowned in a separate incident off the island of Samos, all while trying to cross the sea from nearby Turkey. Britain's National Air Traffic Service was forced to restrict the flow of aircraft. As it works to address a technical issue, airports including London Luton and Birmingham said they were working to understand the impact and the timescale, while British Airways also said it was working closely with National Air Traffic Service to understand the impact.
And with this, our program draws to a close. For more news, you can follow our social media platforms. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.